Hello, everyone. Welcome back to us again. And with me on the other line side is my friend Aaron. And we're back again to continue our discussion about the Screwtape Letters. We are now on chapter 3. And anybody who's listening to this and you're interested in joining us, just reach out to me and let me know. And we can add you to the call. We can all discuss this together. Going into the chapter 3, Aaron, do you want to kick us off with some of your thoughts?
Sure. Very opening. It's all about how we all have someone, or in some cases, many someones in our lives that can be used to bring us down. And that's not necessarily a knock on those other people. It's just what happens in life. We can be used the same way. And so, in this particular chapter, um, Screwtape's discussing to Wormwood, tactics for doing that. Through annoyances and irritations and all the little things really that pile up.
Oh, yes, yes. Yep. So, yeah, so, and yeah, he kicks right off with relationship with mother, right? And, we all have a growing up, a parent at some point in our life that we say, oh, you annoy me. So he picked an interesting relationship between mother and son.
Yep.
That seems to be a an interesting analogy or a anecdote. So, any particular highlights that stood out to you early on in the chapter, Aaron?
Well, I guess yeah. The first paragraph um, talks about um, keeping the patient's mind on the inner life. What I wrote about that was more keep him thinking about real uh, innate detail as opposed to the obvious things that he's doing. And I guess my summary there is to counter that would be, well, be nice, interact with others positively, regardless of how they're interacting with you. And it seems to kind of overcome what the enemy is trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point because I took a note here, highlighted the phrase self-examination for an hour without discovering. And my note to that, I wrote, Satan attempts to convince us that our transformation is complicated and difficult, so we miss the simple changes God is working on. For example, the obvious change is to change our language when Satan would rather us focus on church attendance with changing character. Uh, I remember my walk was I would quickly look at the other Christians around me and go, okay, there's my bar, and all the while God was trying to help me out with just the smallest little things rather than trying to become, for example, becoming Billy Graham overnight. It's well, just get one step closer to being who you should be rather than trying to make leaps and bounds.
Yeah, that's a good point. We make things too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So as I read through this chapter, I went through and made up my highlights. I think the paragraphs are numbered one, two, three, four, etc. So kind of made my notes that way as well.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So so the next paragraph talks about the way I summarized it anyways was wanting others to change, not accepting them as they are. In this particular chapter, the context is basically the patient is struggling with his mother, who seemed to have some sort of physical condition that was annoying, in addition to the normal relationship annoyances that are always there. And Wormwood is being encouraged by Screwtape to really utilize that. And so he's getting into his patient's mind about, you know, praying for his mother. But while he's in prayer, to focus on all those annoyances, and he starts talking about rheumatism is the physical ailment there. What Wormwood is trying to do here, or being directed to do by Screwtape, is while he's praying to bring his thought life to thinking about her in the state that he would want her to be in. And I am absolutely guilty of that. That brought home the practicality of this. I'm always thinking of other people. Really like to see him here, and my prayers would be answered if my interactions with him are like this instead of what they are now. And the whole point here that C.S. Lewis is trying to write is, why don't we just accept people as they are and not focus on how they need to change, So that's kind of how I summarize that whole second paragraph.
Yeah. One thing I saw out of it was the point, in some degree, be praying for an imaginary person, and it will be your task to make that imaginary person daily less and less like the real mother. And that was interesting to me, and it caught my attention in respect that um, that we also it's so easy for us to go, rather than, I'll just write my notes here. We tend to hide behind prayer as a way to avoid the physical interactions of the welfare that God truly intends for us to have. Um, we come across people so often in life that are in need of something, and our first response is, "I'll pray for you." And while prayer is always welcome, always a good idea, we often stop there rather than go, "Oh, uh, I have the ability to, say, offer this person a job in my company who could, help them get on, get off their feet, get on their feet and get on into a new job position that helps them get out of their situation, or I know, you have the ability or the talent to help that person medically, rather than just say, I'll pray for you, and then you walk away, and then we often, how many times do we um, turn around, we forget to pray for that person because we didn't really mean what we want. We just said it as a way to move on in our lives. And so, he's saying, I think that's very, that caught me there is we start disconnecting the person we're praying for with the real person, uh, rather than actually taking our time to physically interact and try to keep that person real in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I had that highlighted as well, being praying for an imaginary person. I thought that kind of worded it very well.
Yeah.
The next paragraph goes on to um, really, I guess, what we've already been talking about, focusing on the irritating things that all humans have, but particularly people you've lived together with for a long time, like your mother in this case.
Okay. Yep.
So
Or spouses or children or
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, anybody you've lived with. So focus on the tones and expressions of the face, anything that's irritating, and to keep that in focus and work on that. And oh, it's amazing how relationship can disintegrate from very little things sometimes.
yeah, I had the same thing highlighted. Yes, yeah, I think you're right. How easily a relationship can fall apart by uh, and was it, I mean, basically it comes down to, we mistake our assumed communication, the irritating voice or irritating tones, as the real communication over what should be the real communication, which is actually talking through what we feel. We often uh, mis- uh, replace it with those irritating tones and eyebrow raises, and go, oh well, that eyebrow raise must really mean something, this or that, rather than actually asking the person what they mean. We just assume something out of it. Yeah. Chapter that paragraph 3 there, is very telling of how communication breakdown can lead to dissension between people.
Sure, for sure. And so those are all kind of fundamental things that we deal with when we're with people face to face, living
Mhm.
in their own home, or if you have roommates in college or whatnot. And paragraph 4 just really brings it home to me because at the time C.S. Lewis wrote this, he didn't have Facebook. Paragraph 4 is kind of talking about that passive aggressive behavior. We use the term passive aggressive now because it's become so popular, but this whole paragraph is talking about that kind of behavior. Seemingly harmless behavior, but in context, very irritating behavior.
Mm.
So maybe a comment that would normally, sound really good, but in the context, someone's actually trying to, use it to bring you down. So he's talking about that in paragraph 4, and you get that kind of thing when you're living with someone. But uh, the very last sentence, I think, of that paragraph talks about the habit being well established. And it's a delightful situation where a human says things with the express purpose of offending, yet has a grievance or takes offense, when the other person reacts to it negatively, right? And that's exactly what happens in social media these days. So passive aggressive, this chapter talks about here. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and where can you not see it any more than in today's uh, well, I mean, we now experience it, and I guess I won't historically say it's any more or better or worse than during C.S. Lewis's time. Yeah, I mean, I imagine human behavior in this context has probably been just as bad back then as it is now, but we are certainly experiencing it in maybe in a more uh, maybe in a more widespread way because of our connection to Facebook and to seeing comments and media flow so readily across so much medium that we're getting so much more of these little statements like that. Yeah, so maybe that we're more inundated with these little passive aggressive statements and people getting irritated so easily.
Yeah, I agree. I think, those feelings were always there amongst people, but social media has given people a platform to express it. And it's opened up a whole new way of interacting with people that we haven't quite figured out how to handle yet.
Yeah, I mean, remember when email and text messaging, started coming, really becoming mainstream, during our time, and they started warning that uh, that what is written you can't express the tone of your voice in written word, and there was obviously that was a lost art because before the telephone everything was written, whether it would be telegraph or written handwritten letters. And so there was a time when people had to be more cautious with their words because the only way to express the tone in your words was written. But then when the telephone came about, that declined because then everybody could hear the expression, the tone of your voice. But then when we went back to more email and text messaging, all that tone was lost. But then we never regained the practice of watching our words carefully, like they did back in the old written days before telephones. And so then people would read something, and I would say something in a calm context, and if you had a bad day and you're already irritated by what's going on in your life, and you'd read it in your own mindset of an irritated day, and all of a sudden it would feel like an attack when it wasn't meant to be at all. So
For sure.
it was not in the tone in which I intended it. It was in the tone in which you felt it through your personal experience of the time. And so there was the lost art of phrasing phrasing something in a way that would set the tone properly, regardless of the reader. And we've all there's obviously classes now that go back and teach HR classes and everything, trying to regain that, but it's certainly not been. It was lost to me. I never really had that lesson. I don't remember really learning it in school or being taught that um, at any time because again it was a dying concept. But And now we have video, right? So you have the, if you're using video like we are now, you have the voice and facial expressions that kind of brings it back around. So it kind of goes back to not needing the, the, the saying your words right anymore. So it's a balancing act, I guess. I don't know where technology will end up in that on that side of the spectrum, but um, with message posts and everything that kind of gets out there, I guess it's it's hard. I mean, I was just thinking, it just popped in my head some of the political stuff we heard, people saying things before they really framed it, and even then, it was still taken out of context of what people really were meaning. And then everybody had to backtrack and explain themselves even further because they didn't take care about about what they were saying. So it seems to be the political arena we're in the common culture of today, I guess.
Yeah, I think bottom line with all of this is whether the time that this book was written or the time we live in or future time where there's even more communication media, communications are a path that the enemy uses.
Hmm.
He confuses communications. That's what this chapter is all about. As the very final paragraph talks about the mother's religious position. So she's obviously a non-believer or non-Christian, and her son is, and so the enemy is trying to confuse, the two, both the new Christian as well as the mother who's watching his behaviors, and I think that's quite fascinating. And in terms of communication being confused,
Hmm.
I personally I think that that's probably the number one tactic of the enemy, at least in my life, and probably in many others. And so he's doing it here in this chapter and encouraging it, and he's encouraging it in a way where it's a new believer and it's a mother who is relying on her son with a physical ailment that she has. And was not talked about a lot, but it's mentioned once or twice in here, is that if the new believer, her son, simply acts like a Christian and does what God wants him to do, and doesn't think so much, whether it's in prayer or just in thought, doesn't think so much about the details about who he wants her to be someday. He just acts out being a Christian, how the enemy would be defeated. They mention that here, or Screwtape mentions that here, is don't let them think that way. Don't let them just do what Christ would do. And so I think he kind of rounds the chapter out this way, and starts talking about how the mother may be jealous of the new factor in her son's life. There's this intimacy with Christ that a mother is used to having with her son in this case.
Yeah, I
And,
found it interesting that you thought that the mother didn't have a belief in God. I kind of took it the other way around. And the words that caught my attention is that what she considers she gave him such good opportunity of learning in childhood. So I got the sense from the story that she was attempting to teach him about God, but he had refused it for most of his life, and then now he's coming back around to it, and it's kind of like, um, yeah, and it's kind of like now, oh, okay, it's like, oh, now you want to be part of, get into the into God after I've been spending all those years trying to get you to do it, and now all of a sudden, so you're getting it from these other people, and so why them? Why are you following them and not what I tried to teach you? So
yeah, that very well could be.
I
Yeah,
kind of got from the other side, but I guess either way it works. I guess
yeah,
either
that's right.
I think your argument is just as valid in this case. Um, so I think I found it more interesting that you and I got two different sides of that, perspective on it from, and they're both work, but it was just interesting our two different points of view.
Yeah, that is interesting. I can see. Yeah, actually, I go back and read it. I guess I had the bias just in starting the chapter that she was non-believer, but I don't know that it necessarily says that explicitly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'd have to go back and read and see where that if it was, I don't recall now where the mother's position is, but like I said, it just caught my attention that we both had opposite points of view on that. But but however, your argument and my argument, I think both hold true in that in any case, there's a mother to child relationship that when a child or father to child relationship, a child shuns education um, one way or the other, and then uh, they either go opposite of us in life, or they go in a way that we finally get. I think it's um, having putting a wedge between the relationships. I think
Hmm.
that's in either case it probably works in understanding that.
Yeah. So, well, good. Well, another good practical chapter that
Yeah.
I thought I read it and said, then I read it again. I said, wow, that's again surprisingly applicable. So I got a lot out of it.
Well, very good. So, Aaron, thank you once again for meeting me on here to discuss. I'm having to discuss it with somebody. I'm getting other points of view, and I think it's interesting to read something, but when you talk about it with somebody else, you take a deeper point of view into it. I'm enjoying um recording this because I'm going to have fun later on in time when we go back and listen to our discussion and go, wow, I said that. So uh, it's going to be fun then. But for all those listening to us, I hope you find what we're saying useful or interesting. Look, like to hear your feedback on whether or not what we're doing is interesting. If nothing else, but I think Aaron and I will continue doing this because for us it's been healthy for us to get together and discuss and kind of record this journal of our discussions along the way, and we'll get through and we'll continue on. But we're trying to get this done around a weekly basis around our schedules. But we thank you for your tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next chapter. It will be chapter 4 next. So thank you very much.
All right.